"We've been measuring something here that honestly shouldn't be happening," Travis said quietly, still watching the monitor. "The laser should travel in a straight line, but at a certain altitude, it doesn't. It hits an invisible boundary and bends. Not scatters, not diffuses. It turns, like it's passing through something with mass." For a moment, no one spoke. You could hear the wind outside the command trailer, rattling the thin metal walls. The idea that empty sky could behave like a solid surface was deeply unsettling. Just when the team at Skinwalker Ranch thought they were beginning to understand the limits of what this place could do, an incident unfolded that changed everything. The data coming in wasn't just strange anymore. It was dangerous. Alarms tripped. Instruments spiked, and for the first time in the project's history, the call was made to evacuate the property. Not as a precaution, as a necessity. Whatever they had disturbed or uncovered appeared capable of causing real harm. "Is this just another chapter in the ranch's long, dark story?" someone asked quietly. "Or is there something down there that could actually kill us?" Out near the Mesa, the drill team noticed something else. When the soil was pulled up, the layers didn't behave the way they should. "There's something wrong with this dirt," Thomas said, crouching near the borehole, running the material through his gloved fingers. "See this? The clay layer just stops, right here. Then it starts again over there. That's not how natural deposition works." The earth looked scarred, as if something had been cut into it long ago and then buried. Back in the command center, Principal Investigator Eric Bard called everyone together. The room filled with the low hum of servers, the glow of monitors reflecting off tired faces. Pete Kelsey, their subsurface imaging specialist, pulled up the latest scans, data collected between the Mesa drilling site and Homestead 2. As the image resolved, a strange shape emerged. It wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It had edges, symmetry, intent. Positioned just west of the circular anomalies and south of the active drill zone, the formation resembled the profile of a lion. Head, body, even what looked like a mane suggested by layered density patterns. "That's not geology," Pete said, almost under his breath. "Rocks don't do that." The silence that followed was heavy. "We've got 5 straight parallel lines running through this area," Eric added, pointing to the overlay. "Perfectly straight. Perfectly spaced. There's no farming equipment, no known utility lines, no natural process that explains that. It's a good sample," one of the technicians muttered. "A really good one. And the more we look at it, the less normal it becomes." Surface scans couldn't tell them how deep the structure went, only that it extended far beyond what simple erosion or sediment could account for. Whatever it was, it had been placed there or carved there with purpose. The discovery stirred an uncomfortable memory. Months earlier, during an investigation with Jay Stratton, their GPS systems had gone haywire. Coordinates drifted. Distances warped. As if something massive underground was bending the signals themselves. At the time, it had been written off as interference. Now, looking at the data on the screen, no one was so sure. Because if there really was something enormous buried beneath the mesa, and if it was capable of warping light, soil, and space itself, then the question was no longer, what is this place? It was, what have we been standing on all this time? Could this newly discovered formation be connected to the mysteries that had plagued the ranch for decades? The question lingered heavily in the air as the team studied the data. Speculation spread quietly through the room. Some considered the possibility of rare and undocumented geological processes, forces deep within the earth-shaping stone in ways science had yet to fully understand. Others wondered if the patterns could be the result of long-buried human activity, perhaps secret experiments or structures lost to time. And, unspoken but present in every mind, was the possibility that something not of this world had left its mark beneath the soil. Determined to move beyond theories, Eric made a decision. We need more scans, higher resolution, different angles, and we need boots on the ground, he said. Data can only tell us so much. We have to see this for ourselves. The team agreed. There was no substitute for standing directly over the anomaly, feeling the land beneath their feet, and confronting whatever was hidden there. Despite the growing unease, Eric remained quietly hopeful. If answers existed anywhere, they were buried beneath this mesa. And perhaps, after years of uncertainty, they were finally close. But the past cast a long shadow. This was not the first time people had warned about disturbing the ground at Skinwalker Ranch. Nearly 20 years earlier, the Sherman family, former owners of the property, had issued strong cautions about digging in certain areas. They spoke of consequences, of things that should be left alone. Their warnings were not casual folklore, they were rooted in fear born of experience. Even Brandon Fugel, the current owner, had been explicitly advised not to excavate near Homestead 2. The message was clear. Digging there could trigger something catastrophic. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, the Shermans had allowed investigations led by billionaire Robert Bigelow. Much of what occurred during that time remained classified or quietly buried in sealed reports. But the Shermans' reluctance to disturb the soil suggested they had witnessed something deeply unsettling, phenomena they believed were directly caused by breaking the surface. They had learned the hard way that the ranch reacted, that the ground itself seemed to be a boundary. Eric's team took those warnings seriously. Maybe something dangerous truly was hidden below. Maybe earlier attempts to dig had awakened forces no one could control. The Shermans' refusal might not have been superstition at all, but an act of survival. Still, Eric and Travis Taylor understood the risk and accepted it. Caution would guide every step. But fear would not stop them. If the truth was buried, then the only way to uncover it was to dig. As excavation began, something immediately felt wrong. The soil was not what it should have been. Instead of the expected layers of sand and rock, they uncovered a strange, grey, clay-like material. It was dense, smooth, almost oily in texture. When they cut deeper, the consistency abruptly changed, as if one layer had been placed on top of another by design rather than by nature. "This isn't normal," Eric said quietly, rubbing the material between his fingers. "The composition's wrong. The layering's wrong. It doesn't behave like natural sediment." Then came the second surprise. Embedded within the clay were crystalline fragments, hard, angular, reflective. They caught the light in sharp flashes, unlike any mineral typically found in this part of Utah. The crystals appeared scattered, but not randomly, as if they had been mixed deliberately into the soil. Travis examined one closely. "This doesn't look like anything that should be here. Not at this depth, not in this formation." The air grew still as the implications set in. The earth beneath Skinwalker Ranch was not just strange, it was structured, altered, and possibly engineered. And whatever had been placed there, whatever had shaped the soil, bent the lasers in the sky, and distorted the signals above, might still be there, waiting, just below their feet. This personality works extremely well for the kind of story you're telling, because it strikes a rare balance between scientific restraint and creeping existential unease. The voice feels like that of a serious investigative documentary rather than sensational fiction, which gives the events weight and credibility. The characters don't overreact. Instead, their confusion, exchanged glances, and cautious speculation mirror how real researchers would respond when confronted with data that refuses to fit established models. That realism makes the mystery more unsettling, not less. What's especially effective is how the narrative escalates in a logical, almost clinical progression. It begins with anomalous soil, moves to patterned crystalline material, then to multispectral scans revealing conductive elements aligned in straight, deliberate lines. Each step builds on the last, so when the comparison to a giant underground circuit board finally emerges, it doesn't feel like a leap. It feels like an unavoidable conclusion. The horror comes not from sudden shock, but from the slow realization that the anomaly is structured, purposeful, and possibly engineered. The use of technical language, cross-sections, multispectral imaging, elemental conductivity, grounds the scene in real scientific methodology, while the unanswered questions preserve the sense of dread. The team isn't jumping to extraterrestrial conclusions. They're trapped in a space where every hypothesis, whether geological, human, or non-human, carries implications that are equally disturbing. That restraint makes the moment more powerful. Silence, hesitation, and the inability to settle on any single explanation convey far more tension than overt panic ever could. Overall, the personality feels like that of scientists standing at the edge of something fundamentally wrong with their understanding of the world. Calm on the surface, methodical in approach, but quietly shaken by the growing certainty that what lies beneath Skinwalker Ranch is not random, not natural in any comforting sense, and very possibly not meant to be uncovered at all. Here is a refined, cohesive essay version with a natural documentary flow and heightened emotional realism. A product of unusual interactions among minerals deep underground, that was the most conservative explanation Eric and Travis could offer. Yet even that felt insufficient. Whatever these conductive lines truly represented, they pointed towards something far more complex than ordinary geology. Beneath Skinwalker Ranch, patterns were emerging that hinted at structure, intent, and a depth of mystery no surface scan could fully explain. With every new discovery, their excitement grew, but so did their caution. Experience had taught them that the ranch did not reveal its secrets without consequence. Disturbing the ground, altering the airspace, even introducing new frequencies into the environment often seemed to provoke a response. And responses here were rarely benign. To push deeper into the unknown, the team initiated a series of controlled experiments designed to stimulate the phenomena rather than merely observe it. Rockets and mortars were launched into carefully selected zones, an approach that in the past had produced dramatic results, including electromagnetic spikes and unexplained aerial activity. But during one such test, something went wrong in a way no one could have predicted. As a mortar climbed through the sky, it detonated prematurely, far earlier than its programmed fuse should have allowed. The explosion bloomed in mid-air, scattering fragments across the darkness and sending a shockwave through the watching crew. For a split second, there was only stunned silence. Then the cameras revealed something else. High-speed footage captured a small luminous object streaking across the Mesa at an estimated speed of nearly 3,600 miles per hour, far beyond the capabilities of any known aircraft, missile, or biological organism. Frame by frame, Burdett Anderson and the analysis team tracked its motion. In just over a second, it had crossed nearly half a mile of terrain. The timing was impossible to ignore. The object appeared moments after the mortar's unexplained detonation, as if the explosion itself had triggered a response. The implication was deeply unsettling, that something on the ranch was not only present but reactive. A system. A sentinel. Or perhaps an intelligence that did not appreciate being disturbed. The realization marked a turning point. Skinwalker Ranch was no longer simply a place of strange stories and ambiguous lights. It was an active environment, one that could interact with human technology and possibly defend itself. Seeking a different angle of approach, Eric and Travis turned their attention to sound. Historical accounts from around the world described strange aerial objects appearing when specific frequencies were broadcast, particularly in mountainous regions. Some researchers had even proposed that certain tonal ranges could weaken the boundary between spaces, what some loosely called portals. The idea sounded speculative, but the ranch had already taught them that conventional limits did not always apply. They began methodically transmitting controlled tones, sweeping through low to high frequencies, watching their instruments, the skies, and the surrounding terrain for any reaction. The physics was simple. Higher frequencies produced higher pitches, lower frequencies deeper vibrations, but the potential implications were anything but. Almost immediately, anomalies returned. Sensors spiked. Visual disturbances appeared. Subtle distortions in the air seemed to ripple in response to specific tonal ranges. It was as if the environment itself were resonating, tuning in. The possibility was both thrilling and terrifying. That sound, properly calibrated, might not just detect the phenomena, but summon it. Emboldened by these results, the team escalated their efforts once again. This time they launched a massive swarm of 250 synchronized drones, creating a three-dimensional sensor grid over the ranch, with particular focus on the infamous triangular zone where so many anomalies had been recorded. The sky filled with steady, blinking lights as the drones rose in formation, their movement precise, their telemetry stable. For a moment, everything appeared normal. Then, at approximately 300 feet above ground, one drone broke formation. It drifted sideways, slowly at first, then with increasing deflection, as if caught in a current no wind meter could detect. Its guidance system showed no malfunction. Its motors were functioning perfectly. Yet something unseen was pushing it off course. The team watched in silence as the machine resisted corrected, and was pushed again. Whatever lay above and beneath Skinwalker Ranch was not passive. It was interacting, and it was beginning to make itself known. Why had only a single drone broken formation? Was it nothing more than a random mechanical failure, or had it brushed against something invisible, something that exerted force, intent, and control? The question lingered as Eric and Travis pressed forward, refusing to let uncertainty slow them down. If the ranch was reacting, then they needed to understand how and why. They escalated the experiments, more rockets, more mortars. Carefully timed, precisely aimed, launched into the same regions of sky where anomalies had repeatedly appeared. The strategy was no longer passive observation, it was provocation. If something was there, they wanted it to reveal itself unmistakably. As the next series of rockets climbed into the darkness, the monitors lit up with something no one expected. A thin, razor-straight line suddenly materialized against the star field, too perfect, too defined to be a cloud or contrail. It looked almost like a boundary, or a seam in the sky itself. At the exact moment it appeared, multiple drones and ground sensors registered abnormal readings, electromagnetic fluctuations, subtle distortions in spatial measurements, brief spikes that suggested something tangible had formed where moments before there had been nothing at all. This was no illusion, no artifact of optics. Something physical had manifested, and it had done so in direct response to their activity. Then came the most disturbing event yet. During another nighttime launch, a rocket streaked upward in a clean, bright arc, until, without warning, it separated. Not exploded, not malfunctioned. It split into multiple points of light, each one moving independently yet in perfect coordination, maintaining formation as though guided by a single intelligence. The sky above the Mesa now held a pattern of synchronized luminous objects, maneuvering with purpose. Seconds later, the now familiar high-speed anomaly appeared again. It crossed the field of view in a blink, faster than any jet, faster than any missile, faster than physics should comfortably allow. Its motion was smooth, controlled, and utterly unconcerned with inertia. On the screens, it left a streak of data and then vanished, as if slipping back through a layer of reality the instruments could barely sample. This was no longer coincidence. Their actions were eliciting responses. Advanced sensors confirmed what human eyes could not. Infrared and thermographic cameras clearly tracked the objects, revealing intense heat signatures and structured movement. One of them radiated energy so strongly that it created localized thermal hotspots in the air itself. And yet, when the team looked up with their own eyes, there was nothing. No solid craft, no glowing hull, no visible source. How could something emit that much heat and remain optically invisible? It was as if the object existed only in certain bands of reality, present in energy, absent in light. The realization sent a quiet chill through the command center. Whatever they were interacting with was not bound by the same rules of perception or physics. It could appear, disappear, fragment, accelerate, and conceal itself at will, and still they continued. Driven by the need to understand, unwilling to retreat, Eric, Travis, and Caleb prepared for the next phase. The risks were no longer theoretical. The ranch was responding. The sky was responding. The ground beneath them, layered with conductive lines and crystalline structures, felt less like soil and more like infrastructure. Something was there. Something was watching. And with every experiment, they were getting closer to whatever threshold separated observation from direct contact. As they prepared another rocket for launch, something else drew their attention. Deep in the trees to the east, a faint purple glow appeared, barely visible at first, then steadily intensifying. Almost at the same moment, their instruments registered another disturbance in the sky, another anomaly forming where nothing should have been. The timing was too precise to ignore. Confusion rippled through the team. The purple light wasn't stationary. It pulsed, shifted, and seemed to linger as if it were watching them. Or worse, studying them. The idea that they might be under deliberate observation by an unknown intelligence sent a quiet wave of unease through everyone present. Needing visual confirmation, Eric ordered the crew into a utility vehicle. They drove into the forest, cutting through the darkness to approach the source from a different angle. The trees closed in around them, headlights slicing through mist and shadow. When they reached the area where the light had been seen, Their unease only deepened. There was no flare, no drone, no tower, no equipment of any kind. Yet the purple glow was still there. Even more disturbing, it began to behave in a way no natural light source should. As Thomas moved, the glow shifted with him, subtly but unmistakably, as if it were tracking his position. When he stopped, it stopped. When he stepped to the side, the illumination followed, briefly outlining his silhouette before drifting again. No one spoke for several seconds. Theories were offered in low voices. Advanced hidden technology, classified surveillance systems, some form of directed energy. Others dared to suggest something far less conventional, an intelligence actively monitoring their presence and reacting in real time. None of the explanations felt adequate. Nothing they knew of could behave this way, remain unseen, and yet so precisely responsive. The realization was chilling. If the phenomenon was intelligent, then the ranch was no longer just a place of strange physics. It was an environment under observation, and possibly under control. As the night wore on, Travis Taylor's concern hardened into conviction. The pattern was becoming impossible to dismiss. Every major experiment, rockets, drones, frequency sweeps, was being met with a response. Not random, not passive, deliberate, escalating. "We're not just observing something," Travis finally said. "We're interacting with it. And it's interacting back." He warned that whatever was present at Skinwalker Ranch appeared capable of manipulating matter, energy, and perception. Continuing without fully understanding the nature of that intelligence could have catastrophic consequences. What began as scientific curiosity was rapidly approaching the boundary of genuine danger. His words carried weight. A man trained in physics, aerospace, and defense systems does not lightly suggest evacuation. "We may need to shut this down," he said quietly. "And we may need to leave. Now. Before we cross a line we can't come back from." For a moment, the ranch seemed to hold its breath. Yet the desire for answers was stronger than fear. The team stood at the edge of something unprecedented, and turning back now meant possibly never understanding what lay beneath the mesa or in the sky above it. After careful deliberation, they chose to proceed, but with heightened caution and full awareness of the risks. Eric Bard approved one final escalation. If something was hiding in the triangular zone above the ranch, they would force it to reveal itself. Caleb and Travis prepared rockets and mortars fitted with high-powered charges. The plan was to fire directly into the heart of the anomaly, saturating the airspace with sensors, high-speed cameras, thermal imaging, radar, and drone coverage. Every system was recalibrated. Every data stream was synchronized. Nothing would go unrecorded. The night was silent as the launch platforms were armed. Above them, the triangle waited. As night settled over Skinwalker Ranch, an unnatural stillness seemed to take hold. The air felt heavy, charged, as though the land itself were waiting. Stars burned sharply in the sky, yet the darkness between them felt deeper than usual, almost layered. Caleb and Travis took up their positions near the launch site, eyes scanning the horizon and instruments alike, while Eric and the rest of the team watched from the glow of the command center, every screen alive with data. When the rockets finally ignited, the silence shattered. Columns of fire tore upward, trailing smoke and thunder as they climbed into the void. Almost instantly, the instruments reacted. Heat signatures flared where nothing should have been. Electromagnetic fields spiked. Radiation sensors flickered with sudden, inexplicable bursts. On the monitors, objects appeared and vanished at velocities far beyond any aircraft or drone, blurs of motion that crossed vast distances in fractions of a second. Then it happened again. One rocket, still climbing, abruptly separated, not exploding but dividing into multiple points of light. The fragments held formation, moving together in perfect synchronization just as they had during the earlier experiment. The message was unmistakable now. This was not random interference. It was a response, an intelligent one. Determined to push deeper, Eric brought in David Mason, a specialist whose work bridged optics, atmospheric physics, and classified sensing technology. Mason arrived with a device unlike anything the team had used before, the triple-spectrum light-wave transmitter. It was capable of projecting 3 bands of light simultaneously, infrared, ultraviolet, and visible, allowing them to illuminate regions of reality normally hidden from human perception. When the system powered up, 3 intense beams lanced into the sky, perfectly aligned, slicing through the darkness. Almost immediately, the screens erupted with activity. Objects that had been invisible moments before now flared into existence on infrared, revealing structured movement, heat signatures, and shifting forms that refused to conform to any known craft or natural phenomenon. The anomalies were not merely present, they were reacting, maneuvering in response to the specific wavelengths being broadcast. Just as sound frequencies had provoked responses, so too did light. Then the purple glow returned. Near the distant tree line, a vivid violet flash bloomed, stronger and more defined than before. It did not drift aimlessly. It moved with intent, sliding through the forest shadows and subtly adjusting its position as the team shifted. When Caleb stepped forward, the glow shifted. When Thomas turned, it followed. The effect was unmistakable. The light was not illuminating them. It was tracking them. A chill settled over the command center as another alert sounded. Thermal sensors detected an intense heat source hovering in open air, radiating energy comparable to industrial furnaces, yet nothing could be seen with the naked eye. No flame, no object, just empty darkness burning hot on the instruments. Something was there, something powerful, invisible, and fully aware of their presence. To capture definitive proof, Eric and Travis once again called on Burdett Anderson. His high-speed camera systems were capable of recording at 2,000 frames per second, slowing reality itself to a crawl. Every microsecond would be preserved, every anomaly stripped of ambiguity. As another rocket surged skyward, Anderson's cameras locked on, and this time they caught it. A compact object streaked across the field of view, traversing the mesa in an impossibly short span of time. Frame by frame, its path emerged, smooth, controlled, and far beyond hypersonic. It did not tumble like debris. It did not behave like plasma or a meteor. It moved with precision, as though guided by intelligence and intent. When the playback ended, no one spoke. What they were seeing was not folklore, not sensor error, not imagination. It was interaction, and whatever was interacting with them was no longer content to remain hidden. This time the object crossed nearly half a mile of terrain in barely a second. Frame by frame, Burdett Anderson analyzed the footage, measuring its velocity and trajectory with meticulous care. The conclusion was unavoidable. No known aircraft, missile, or drone could accelerate that fast, move that smoothly, or ignore aerodynamic drag so completely. There was no visible means of propulsion, no shockwave, no heat bloom consistent with conventional flight. The motion appeared frictionless, as though the object were slipping through space rather than traveling within it. The implications were staggering. Whatever was operating over Skinwalker Ranch was not bound by the technological limits of human engineering, nor by the familiar constraints of natural physics. It could appear and vanish at will, outpace any pursuit, and remain invisible to the naked eye while fully present on advanced sensors. The ranch was not merely hosting anomalies. It was interacting with something that possessed capabilities far beyond current scientific understanding. During one of the rocket tests, the phenomenon became even more explicit. A single rocket, climbing steadily through the sky, suddenly fractured. It did not explode. Instead, it separated into multiple points of light that maintained formation and maneuvered in perfect synchronization. The fragments behaved less like debris and more like coordinated craft, adjusting position relative to one another as if guided by a single controlling intelligence. The display left the entire team silent. There was no natural process that could account for such controlled division and motion. Moments later, another high-velocity object appeared. High-speed cameras and infrared systems tracked it clearly, yet no one could see it with their eyes. It traversed the airspace with impossible speed, then vanished abruptly, not fading, not descending, but simply ceasing to exist within observable space. Sensor data showed intense heat output, energy levels that should have produced a visible glow or ionized trail. Yet visually there was nothing. Something was radiating power while remaining optically absent. The only explanations that fit the data were deeply unsettling, either a form of technology far in advance of anything publicly known, employing perfect stealth and exotic propulsion, or a phenomenon that did not exist entirely within the same physical frame of reference as the observers. Dimensional effects, controlled space-time distortion, or forms of matter interacting only selectively with the electromagnetic spectrum were no longer speculative ideas. They were becoming necessary considerations. For Travis Taylor, the pattern was now unmistakable. Every escalation by the team had been met with a response. Every provocation had been answered with greater sophistication. Every attempt to observe had triggered interaction. The ranch was not passive. It was reactive. And whatever was responding was intelligent. Travis no longer framed his concerns as theoretical. The trajectory was clear: increased activity, increased capability, increased proximity. The phenomena were no longer merely being detected. They were engaging. Testing. Possibly warning. His assessment to Eric and to Brandon Fugel was blunt and unambiguous. We are no longer just studying unknown physics. We are provoking something that is actively responding to us. We don't understand its intent, its limits, or its rules, and every experiment is pushing it further. The conclusion he delivered carried the weight of both scientist and defense analyst. We have to seriously consider shutting this operation down, evacuating the ranch. Because if this is an intelligent system, and all evidence now suggests it is, then we are escalating an interaction with something we do not understand and cannot control, and the consequences of crossing that line could be catastrophic. The potential consequences of ignoring Travis Taylor's warning were becoming impossible to dismiss. Whatever forces were at work around Skinwalker Ranch appeared fully capable of overwhelming not only their instruments, but their understanding of reality itself. The phenomena they had documented, objects moving at impossible speeds, intelligent responses to sound and light, invisible heat sources, and deliberate interference with their experiments, suggested an intelligence operating far beyond conventional physics or human technology. The team now stood at a crossroads. Every test they had run had escalated the situation. Each rocket launch, each drone flight, each frequency and light experiment had been met with increasingly sophisticated reactions, as though something unseen were watching, learning, and responding in real time. What had once felt like scientific exploration was beginning to resemble an interaction, perhaps even a confrontation. Skinwalker Ranch was no longer just a place of strange stories or unresolved folklore. It had become a demonstrable hotspot of active, intelligent phenomena. The evidence was no longer subtle. It was measurable, repeatable, and deeply unsettling. Travis's warning cut through the tension with clarity. Continuing the investigation meant willingly provoking something they could not define, could not predict, and could not control. The risk was no longer theoretical. The ranch had shown the ability to manipulate energy, space, perception, and possibly even intent. Pushing further could invite consequences that extended far beyond the team itself. And yet, walking away meant leaving answers buried. The question weighed heavily on Eric Bard, Brandon Fugel, and every researcher present. Should they shut everything down, evacuate, and accept that some boundaries were never meant to be crossed? Or should they continue, knowing that the pursuit of truth might come at an unimaginable cost? The stakes had never been higher. The mysteries beneath Skinwalker Ranch were no longer passive. They were active, responsive, and possibly aware. Whatever lay hidden beneath the soil and above the mesa was not simply an anomaly. It was an intelligence capable of challenging the limits of human knowledge itself. And the next decision they made might determine not only the future of the investigation, but whether they would be allowed to continue it at all. What made the situation even more disturbing was the growing realization that such activity did not appear evenly distributed across the globe. Again and again, the most intense clusters of sightings, encounters, and high strangeness seemed concentrated in one place, the United States. When researchers compared global UFO reports with those occurring domestically, the pattern was hard to ignore. The density, the frequency, and the apparent intelligence behind the events suggested a focus, almost as if certain regions were being deliberately monitored or tested. And Skinwalker Ranch might not be the only location. Hundreds of miles away, in another place long associated with geothermal power and hidden depths, similar whispers were beginning to surface. Inside Yellowstone National Park, sections of land were quietly being designated as restricted zones. At first, the closures were explained as routine conservation efforts or safety precautions. But behind the scenes, park rangers and officials were beginning to speak in hushed tones about things they had witnessed. Strange lights moving through steam-filled valleys, glowing orbs drifting silently above forests, equipment malfunctions, animals behaving in panic. and in some cases, incidents so disturbing they had never been formally acknowledged. A Yellowstone official would later hint that what was happening in the restricted areas went far beyond ordinary geological activity. The park, like Skinwalker Ranch, sat atop vast underground systems, caverns, magma chambers, fault lines, and unknown voids. Places where something unseen might move, hide, or emerge. From the ranch in Utah to the volcanic heart of Yellowstone, a troubling possibility was beginning to take shape. That these locations were not random, that something was happening beneath the surface of the continent itself, and that humanity might only now be realizing it was no longer alone in watching. These accounts painted a picture far stranger than anyone would have expected. In the early summer of 2019, James Caravel was working the night shift at Yellowstone National Park. At 34, he had already spent several years as a ranger and had earned a reputation for being steady, level-headed, and unflappable. Before joining the National Park Service, he had done a brief stint in the Coast Guard, which meant he was no stranger to unusual operations, restricted zones, and the quiet routines of government work. He lived alone in ranger housing near the park's west entrance, in a small cabin that looked out over a broad valley where steam from distant geysers often drifted like low clouds. Every morning, before turning in after a long night shift, James followed the same ritual. He would step outside with a cup of coffee, breathe in the cold mountain air, and watch the fog roll slowly across the landscape as the sun crept up behind the peaks. It was peaceful, grounding, a reminder of why he had chosen this job in the first place. One morning, that calm was broken. As he stood on the porch, the quiet was sliced open by the low, chopping thrum of helicopter blades. The sound was wrong for that hour, and wrong for that part of the park. Yellowstone airspace was tightly controlled, and flights that low were extremely rare. James looked up just as a helicopter emerged from behind the tree line, flying far lower than any tour craft or medevac would be allowed to. It was completely black. No markings, no tail number, no insignia, no reflective paint. Just a matte, light-absorbing silhouette moving slowly, deliberately, as if scanning the terrain below. James felt his stomach tighten. From his Coast Guard days, he knew aircraft protocols. Even military helicopters carried some form of identification, however subtle. This one had nothing, and it was drifting over a restricted sector of the park where even rangers needed special clearance. He lifted his phone, intending to take a photo. Before he could, the helicopter slipped behind the mountains and vanished. The sound faded. The valley returned to silence, but the unease did not. He told himself it was probably some classified training exercise, something above his clearance level. Still, the lack of markings and the low altitude gnawed at him. It felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate. James went inside, poured another cup of coffee, reviewed the morning incident logs, and started his patrol. The day unfolded normally enough, assisting stranded tourists, issuing a warning to a hiker who had wandered off-trail, answering radio calls about bison near a roadway. Yet the image of that black helicopter lingered in the back of his mind like an unfinished sentence. Later that afternoon, while checking a lesser-used service road near a restricted thermal area, he encountered something even stranger. Parked off to the side of the dusty track were two black SUVs. No logos, no agency markings, no license plates. They were positioned neatly, as if intentionally staged, yet the area was far from any public access, and not on the schedule for maintenance crews or scientific teams. James slowed his ranger truck and stopped about 20 feet back, watching. No doors opened, no engines ran, no movement at all. After a moment, he stepped out. Up close, the vehicles looked almost unreal. The road was coated in fine volcanic dust, but the SUVs were spotless. No dirt on the panels, no mud on the wheel wells, no grime on the tires. They looked freshly detailed, as though they had been placed there rather than driven. James walked to the first one and cupped his hands around the window to peer inside. Empty. No equipment. No papers, no bags. Not even a coffee cup in the console. The second SUV was the same, clinically clean, locked and devoid of any sign of occupants. He circled both vehicles, searching for plates, VIN stickers, agency decals, anything that might explain who they belonged to. There was nothing. What unsettled him most were the tire tracks. They did not match the depth or pattern expected for vehicles of that weight on that type of soil. The impressions looked faint, inconsistent, as though the SUVs had barely touched the ground at all. And there were no clear tracks leading away from the spot, only the two vehicles sitting silently, like props left behind after a scene had already moved on. As James stood there, his radio crackled, then went dead. Not static, not interference, just silence. For a brief moment, he thought he heard something else in the air around him. A low, almost whisper-like sound, indistinct and directionless, as if the forest itself were murmuring. It faded as quickly as it came, leaving only the soft hiss of wind through the trees. When his radio signal returned, everything looked normal again. The SUVs were still there. The road was still empty. The forest was still. But James had the unmistakable feeling that he had just stumbled into something he was never meant to see. They didn't stretch back very far, almost as if the vehicles had been set down from above rather than driven in. After nearly 10 minutes of inspecting the area, James pulled out his notepad and carefully recorded the exact location, time, and conditions. He considered calling the sighting in, but something in his gut told him not to. The scene felt off, unofficial, as if reporting it might invite consequences he didn't yet understand. So he left. 3 hours later, on his return patrol, he drove past the same spot. The SUVs were gone, not just gone, erased. There were no tire tracks, no disturbed dust, no sign that anything had ever been parked there at all. It was as though the scene had been reset. A few days later, the situation grew even more unsettling. A large section of the park was suddenly fenced off. A temporary sign identified it as a maintenance area, but James knew the schedules. No maintenance had been approved for that region. Stranger still, the fenced zone didn't even appear on updated internal maps. It was as if the area itself had been quietly removed from official existence. Around the same time, James began encountering radio dead zones during routine patrols. His signal would cut out abruptly in places where communication had always been clear. This had never happened before, not once in all his years working the park. And whenever the signal dropped, he would hear something else, faint, indistinct sounds in the background, like whispering carried on the wind. Not voices he could make out, but the unmistakable impression of murmurs, just beyond comprehension. Disturbed, James brought the issue to his supervisor. He explained the signal failures, the specific coordinates, the way the radio would go completely silent without static or warning. The supervisor barely looked up from his paperwork and dismissed it as routine tower maintenance. James didn't accept that. The explanation didn't fit the pattern. When he pressed for more information, the mood in the room changed. The supervisor slowly set down his pen, met James's eyes and told him, calmly but firmly, to drop the subject. When James insisted it was a safety concern, the man said nothing more. He simply stood, walked out of the office, and left James alone with a growing sense of unease. Still seeking answers, James approached another supervisor later that day. The moment he mentioned the radio dead zones, the color drained from the man's face. He abruptly changed the subject, muttered something about another meeting, and left. From that point on, he avoided James entirely. It was clear now they knew something, and they didn't want him asking about it. That evening, while reviewing patrol logs, James noticed a chilling pattern. Every radio dead zone he had recorded overlapped with, or lay directly adjacent to, the newly restricted areas. When he tried to access maintenance and access schedules for those zones, he discovered his system permissions had been quietly revoked. Then came the field reports. In the backcountry near one of the restricted regions, rangers had found a cluster of elk skulls. 3 of them, close together. No bodies, no blood, just the heads. The cuts were clean, precise, as if made by tools sharper than anything typically used in wildlife predation. There were no signs of scavenging, no tearing, no struggle. The skulls had simply been removed. No official explanation was given. Taken together, the unmarked aircraft, the spotless SUVs, the disappearing tracks, the fenced-off land that wasn't on any map, the radio silence, the whispered sounds, the sudden secrecy, and the surgically separated animal remains. It painted a picture far more disturbing than simple bureaucratic confusion. It suggested surveillance, containment, and something in the park that was not meant to be seen. Yet, all of this was only the beginning. More disturbing reports began to surface, each one harder to explain than the last. A bison carcass was discovered with large sections of hide removed, the cuts so clean and precise they looked surgical. No signs of scavenging. No tearing. Just smooth, deliberate incisions. Another case involved a deer found with its abdominal cavity exposed. Its internal organs appeared partially liquefied, as though subjected to intense, localized heat. Strangely, the surrounding vegetation was untouched. The animal's fur showed no burn marks, no charring, no smoke damage. Even more unsettling, the side of the deer that had been in contact with the ground had turned gelatinous, its flesh softened and distorted, as if melted from within. Tissue samples were taken and sent for analysis, but no known predator, chemical or natural process could account for the damage. The most horrifying discovery, however, involved a juvenile grizzly bear. Its body was found wedged high in the branches of a large tree, far above what any bear could have climbed after death. Part of its skull was missing, along with its brain and eyes. There were no claw marks, no bite patterns, no signs of a struggle. Wildlife experts ruled out scavengers and natural predators. The bear had not fallen. It had not been dragged. It appeared to have been placed there deliberately. How it had been lifted, and by what, remained a complete mystery. As James pieced these incidents together, a chilling pattern emerged. Every one of them occurred near the newly restricted zones, and every one coincided with an increase in black helicopter activity over the park. The sense that something hidden, coordinated, and dangerous was operating beneath the surface of Yellowstone grew impossible to ignore. Then came July 15, 2019. James was patrolling near the Old Faithful region when he noticed strange lights pulsing from within one of the restricted areas. Curiosity and duty pulled him closer. As he approached, he saw several large military transport vehicles parked in a clearing. Nearby were enormous covered containers, each so massive it was difficult to imagine what could be inside them. Figures moved around the site wearing full-body protective suits, similar to hazmat gear. Before James could get any closer, an armed guard intercepted him. The man claimed they were conducting a geological survey and ordered James to leave the area immediately. The explanation felt rehearsed, hollow. James complied, but the scene burned into his memory. From that night forward, he paid closer attention. He noticed increased helicopter activity during new moon phases. His equipment began malfunctioning in strange ways, as though affected by electromagnetic interference. He found tracks in remote areas that did not match any known animal, and hikers continued reporting lights in the sky and deep in restricted valleys. Then, one night around 2:15 a.m., James was driving a maintenance road near Shoshone Lake. Earlier, 3 hikers had reported seeing unusual lights in that same area. Expecting to find nothing more than unauthorized campers, he rounded a curve and abruptly killed his headlights. Ahead of him, the road was blocked. Multiple military vehicles were positioned in a formation resembling a checkpoint. Floodlights illuminated the area. Armed personnel in tactical gear stood guard. James quietly pulled his truck into the brush and, drawing on his years of training, moved into the forest on foot. After nearly 20 minutes of careful movement, he reached a ridge overlooking the operation. Through his binoculars, he saw an extensive setup below, portable lighting towers, equipment stations, and dozens of individuals in hazmat suits moving with disciplined efficiency. Some carried clipboards. Others operated unfamiliar machines. Then a deep mechanical grinding echoed through the valley. One of the massive containers began to open. Hydraulic doors slowly parted, revealing an interior rail system. Large glass cylinders, containment tubes, were being rolled out on tracks. Each was fitted with cables, sensors, and monitoring screens displaying vital signs and unknown data streams. And inside one of them, James saw something that froze him in place. A figure, pale, almost translucent, incredibly tall, at least 7, perhaps 8 feet. Its proportions were wrong, elongated in ways no human anatomy should be. It stood motionless within the glass, surrounded by instruments, as if being studied or transported. In that moment, every strange event began to coalesce into a single, terrifying possibility. The helicopters, the restricted zones, the mutilated animals, the electromagnetic dead zones, the secrecy, the containment units. Whatever was happening in Yellowstone was not just a military exercise. It was not just geology. And it was not meant for public knowledge. James realized he was witnessing the edge of something vast, hidden, and profoundly inhuman. The personnel around the containment unit were heavily armed and moving with extreme caution, as if they were handling something that could become lethal at any moment. A strange blue glow pulsed from inside the massive containers, bathing the clearing in an otherworldly light. As James watched, a sudden wave of nausea washed over him. His head began to pound, sharp and violent, like nails being driven into his skull. Instinctively, he reached for his radio to call for help. Nothing but static answered him. He checked his GPS. The screen was no longer displaying coordinates, only distorted symbols that made no sense, characters he didn't recognize, as if the device itself had lost its ability to interpret reality. Panicking, James pulled out his phone and tried to take photographs. Each time he aimed toward the containment units, the camera glitched, froze, and shut down. That was when fear fully took hold. His vision blurred. His stomach churned. A deep, primal instinct told him he was in danger simply by being there. He turned and ran, crashing through brush and snow, not stopping until he was far from the ridge and back inside his vehicle. He drove away shaking, barely aware of the road beneath his tires. For days afterward, James couldn't escape what he had seen. The image of the pale, towering figure in the glass cylinder replayed in his mind every time he closed his eyes. He was physically ill, nauseous, dizzy, unable to sleep. Mornings found him hunched over the sink, vomiting. He called in sick to work, something he had never done in his career. Whatever he had witnessed had affected him on a level deeper than shock. It felt like exposure. When he finally returned to duty, the park felt different. Unmarked military vehicles were now parked near administrative zones. Teams of men in tactical gear conducted patrols through staff-only areas, moving with quiet discipline. They weren't interacting with tourists. They weren't visible to the public. But to those who worked there, it was obvious something was being guarded, or searched for. Several internal zones were suddenly closed due to what was officially labeled geological instability. The timing was unsettling. Months earlier, those same regions had been the center of multiple UFO sightings and video recordings. Now they were sealed off. One park employee, a man named Sean, had submitted several videos to his supervisors showing strange aerial lights over the Aldera area. The footage documented at least 4 distinct types of unidentified craft over the span of a single month. The correlation was impossible to ignore. Every one of those sightings overlapped with the same regions where James had experienced radio dead zones and equipment failures. And James was not alone. Another witness, who later chose to remain anonymous for fear of ridicule and professional backlash, came forward with his own experience. He had always wanted to see Yellowstone in winter. Snow transformed the park into something alien. Silent white plains, steaming geyser basins, bison moving like shadows through the fog. It felt like another world. Because winter access was restricted, he boarded a snow coach from West Yellowstone. The driver was an older man who told stories as they drove, about roads collapsing overnight, about geothermal vents opening without warning. His tone wasn't playful. It carried the weight of someone who had seen things he didn't fully understand. The witness stayed at the Old Faithful Snow Lodge for several nights. On the first evening, around 8:30 p.m., he stepped outside to photograph the geyser under the stars. The park was unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. As he checked his phone for the next eruption time, something caught his attention near the western edge of the upper geyser basin. A faint light. At first he assumed it was a flashlight. But the color was wrong. It wasn't white. It glowed a soft, warm orange, like a floating ember. It hovered 3 or 4 feet above the ground and moved slowly between the trees, pulsing gently as if breathing. It wasn't attached to anyone. It made no sound, and it wasn't following a path. It was simply there, drifting, watching. The witness watched the light for nearly a full minute, trying to rationalize what he was seeing. Maybe it was a reflection from a window, or a ranger moving through the trees with some unusual lantern. But when he took a few cautious steps toward it, the orb reacted. It didn't drift away. It shot off. In an instant, the soft orange glow accelerated and vanished between the trees at a speed that made no physical sense. There was no arc, no gradual movement, just a sudden impossible burst, as if the light had slipped out of the frame of reality itself. It was not a person. It was not a drone. It was simply a glowing sphere that obeyed none of the rules the witness understood. Almost immediately afterward, his phone began to malfunction. The time display flickered, skipping forward and backward, the digits blurring and freezing before correcting themselves. He had never seen a device behave like that before. It wasn't low battery. It wasn't cold shutdown. It was as if the phone itself had briefly lost its grip on time. The next morning, trying to dismiss the experience, the witness joined a guided cross-country ski tour along the Biscuit Basin Trail, not far from Old Faithful. The landscape was serene, snow-covered trees, steam rising from vents, the muffled quiet of winter. It almost felt normal again, until the guide began telling stories. She spoke casually about local legends, about so-called ghost lights that some rangers and winter visitors had reported for decades. She mentioned how certain geothermal regions were rumored to generate strange electromagnetic effects, and how people had occasionally seen unexplained lights near the Firehole River, moving silently through the steam. The coincidence made the witness uneasy. He considered mentioning what he had seen the night before, but when he lightly hinted at strange lights, the guide only smiled politely, clearly assuming he meant reflections or imagination. Not wanting to be dismissed as another tourist spooked by darkness and cold, he said nothing more. The following day, the group traveled north toward Mammoth Hot Springs. Because winter roads were closed to private vehicles, they boarded another snow coach. This driver was different, quieter, more reserved, a man in his late 50s who watched the passengers through the rearview mirror with an unreadable expression. At one point, without prompting, he mentioned odd sightings near Norris Geyser Basin. He didn't elaborate. The way he said it, carefully, as if weighing each word, gave the impression that he knew far more than he was willing to say. When the coach stopped briefly at Norris, the air was thick with sulfur, steam rolling across the boardwalks, vents hissing like open wounds in the earth. The place felt unstable, restless. The driver's comment, combined with the witness's earlier experience, left him with a growing sense that Yellowstone was hiding layers of activity no brochure ever mentioned. Curiosity got the better of him. He wandered slightly off the boardwalk, closer to a roped-off slope, wanting a clearer view into one of the steaming basins. As he stood there, a sudden, overwhelming sensation washed over him. He was being watched. Not in the ordinary sense of someone nearby. This felt deeper, invasive, like an intelligence had focused its attention on him specifically. The feeling was so strong it triggered a physical reaction. The hairs on his neck rose, his skin prickled, his stomach tightened. He spun around, heart racing. No one was there. The boardwalk was empty. The steam shifted lazily. The snow lay undisturbed, yet the sensation didn't fade immediately. It lingered, heavy and oppressive, leaving him nauseated and lightheaded. He told himself it was nerves, imagination, altitude, anything, but the instinctive fear refused to fully subside. That night, at the Mammoth Hot Springs Hotel, the unease followed him indoors. By 1 a.m., unable to sleep, he wandered into the quiet lobby. The building was old, its long corridors and dim lighting amplifying every sound. The geothermal heat hummed faintly beneath the floors. The place felt less like a hotel and more like a station, temporary, transitory, as though people passed through but something else remained. As he stood there alone, he became aware of the same sensation again. That feeling of attention, of presence, as if something, somewhere within the vast, steaming wilderness surrounding the lodge, was aware that he was there, and had not stopped watching since the moment the orange light had first met his gaze in the trees. In the quiet of the hotel lobby, the witness struck up a conversation with a park employee who was off-duty but still wearing a jacket with a visible badge. At first it was just casual small talk, weather, road conditions, how quiet the park felt at night and winter. Then, almost offhandedly, the employee mentioned that strange things were sometimes reported in the geothermal areas after dark. Lights moving where no one should be, voices echoing where no one was present, sounds that didn't belong to wind, animals, or shifting rock. The employee spoke carefully, as if choosing words that wouldn't sound too dramatic, and hinted that some rangers believed the vast underground network of vents, lava tubes, and caverns beneath Yellowstone might be responsible. A hidden world of heat, pressure, and unknown spaces, still only partially mapped. "There's a lot going on under our feet that we don't fully understand," he said. "More than most people realize. The comment lingered with the witness long after the conversation ended. He found himself thinking about things he had once dismissed as fringe speculation. Ideas about the Yellowstone supervolcano, about massive subterranean chambers, about electromagnetic anomalies, even about claims that certain places on Earth were tied to cosmic energies or secret experiments. Before this trip, he would have laughed at such theories. Now, after seeing a light that moved with impossible speed and feeling a presence that seemed aware of him, those ideas no longer felt so easy to ignore. On his final day in the park, he traveled to Lamar Valley, a wide, open landscape known for wolf sightings. The roads had only just reopened after a heavy snowfall, and the valley felt raw and untouched, blanketed in white and silence. There he met another visitor, a woman setting up a camera with a long telephoto lens, clearly hoping to capture wolves in the fading light. Making conversation, he asked if she had seen anything unusual. She hesitated. Then she admitted that the evening before, just after sunset, she had heard sounds that unsettled her deeply. Not howls, not elk calls, not birds. A series of high, chirping tones that seemed to echo across the valley in patterns, almost like communication. She said the calls didn't match anything in her years of wildlife photography. They didn't sound natural. They sounded wrong. So wrong, in fact, that she had packed up and left before full darkness fell. As the witness listened, a familiar chill crept up his spine. Strange lights, whispering sounds, unidentified calls, radio dead zones, restricted areas. The stories were different, the locations spread across the park, yet the underlying pattern felt the same. Yellowstone was not just a wilderness. It was a vast, living system layered with hidden spaces, unexplained energies, and phenomena that did not easily fit into known categories. Whether geological, electromagnetic, military, or something far more elusive, something was happening beneath and above the park, something that revealed itself only in fragments, to those who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And once you noticed it, it was impossible to fully unsee. The witness found her admission deeply unsettling. She didn't seem like someone prone to exaggeration or superstition. She spoke like a seasoned observer, someone who spent long hours alone in the wilderness, trained to distinguish natural sounds from anomalies. For her to say the calls had frightened her enough to leave before nightfall carried real weight. Even after he left Yellowstone, the experiences refused to fade. The memory of the orange orb drifting silently through the trees, the sudden acceleration that defied physics, the sensation of being watched, and the quiet, careful way park employees spoke about unexplained activity, all seemed to form pieces of a larger, invisible puzzle. None of it fit neatly into coincidence. The final layer of unease came from something small, almost accidental. While browsing a gift shop in Mammoth, the witness overheard two older men speaking in low voices. They were talking about what they called time slips. According to them, hikers sometimes emerged from certain backcountry areas disoriented, convinced only minutes had passed when hours were missing. Search teams would find them confused, radios malfunctioning, watches out of sync. The men spoke of it as if it were an open secret among long-time locals, something rarely discussed with outsiders. The witness didn't interrupt. He simply listened, feeling a cold weight settle in his chest. The phrase missing time echoed in his mind, connecting itself to the malfunctioning phone, the strange sensations near geothermal zones, the reports of radio dead zones, and the way certain areas of the park seemed to bend not just signals, but perception itself. Looking back, the pattern felt impossible to ignore. Glowing orbs that moved intelligently, unnatural sounds and voices in empty valleys, restricted zones that didn't appear on maps, electromagnetic interference and distorted timekeeping, animals behaving strangely, and a persistent feeling of being observed. Individually, each incident could be dismissed. Together, they suggested something far deeper, woven into the very structure of the land. Yellowstone, with its vast magma chambers, underground caverns, and immense geothermal energy, might not only be a geological wonder, but a place where the boundary between known physics and something else grew thin. The witness couldn't say what that something else was. But he no longer believed the park was just wilderness. It felt like a gateway, a monitoring point, or a region where forces beyond ordinary understanding briefly, quietly, revealed themselves to those who happened to look at the wrong moment.